May the words that I speak and the thoughts and wanderings of all of our hearts draw us closer to God, who is our rock and our Redeemer. This is Trinity Sunday, and there is a part of me that would really, really love to get into a very heady, academic, theological discussion of the nature of God, who is three yet one. Because sometimes it's really easy to hide behind that rather than have the really difficult conversation that the world's events seem to make necessary. It's hard to stay away from the news that talks about the rallying and the rioting and the looting and the calls for martial law happening with our closest neighbor. It is not something that is limited to another country, but is raising issues that are very real for all of us. And it's not an easy conversation to have at the best of times. And it's harder to have that conversation when we can't be face to face. Because I can't tell if I'm pushing too hard, or if I could go a little harder, or if I'm missing the point altogether because I can't see you while I'm talking to you. But this Trinity Sunday, it feels to me that what we most need to talk about is Jesus, the Word made flesh, Jesus, God incarnate. What does it mean that God was one of us? It changes our understanding of who God is and of what it means to be human, to proclaim that Jesus is one of us. But there's much more than that. Because Jesus is the one that we look at as the ultimate good guy. That we as Christians say he was right. And what does that mean in this time when we say that the brown-skinned man who was killed by the likely white-skinned Romans was right? Is that too loaded? Am I pushing too hard? The Bible doesn't talk much about the color of people's skin. We sort of have to infer from what country they're from if we even want to try to understand that. What does it mean to talk about Jesus and the way he lived his life, and what happens when we look at him with a presumption of innocence, as we would say under legal language? What would it mean if we say Jesus is given the benefit of the doubt? And that's what I really want to talk about. Knowing who I usually see in church on Sunday morning, and who I can guess is likely listening to the video, the majority of the audience listening to the video, I am one white person talking to other white people about... I always had the idea that everything was fair, and that I was being treated the same way that other people were being treated. And it's really hard when we start to realize that that isn't true. On a broad, systemic level. And this isn't so much about one or two individuals and the racism that we see and can easily condemn that is in broad daylight. It's about something that is deeply ingrained in when we choose to look and when we look away, in what we notice, in what we ignore. There's a little store, little convenience store, not too far from my parents' house, that's also just across the street from two different schools. And they have a sign. They have a sign. I don't know. I haven't been back in that convenience store in probably a comfortable 25 years. That said, no more than 2 students in the store at once. And that sign used to really upset me. Because how do they know who's a student, and what right do they have to assume that students are going to do something wrong? Well, I am no longer a student. My wife is. And you wouldn't know that. And we all kind of know the point they were getting at probably had something to do with their real life experience. But that is as close as I can get in my own experience to the idea of walking into a store and getting followed. But if you ask people of color or Indigenous people about their experience, have you ever been followed when you went into a store and had the presumption that you were going to steal? And that's something that happens. Have you ever been out with your significant other and have had people assume that you were their social worker? A white friend of mine who was dating an Indigenous man had that assumption made of them several times. And these are just a few of the stories, just on the surface. We know that racism exists in our society and culture towards Black people, towards Indigenous people, towards Asian people, towards East Indian people. And we don't necessarily know what to do about it. But what I suggest is that we start intentionally giving the benefit of the doubt to people who are from these marginalized groups. Assume that they're telling the truth about their experience. Assume that they are innocent and that they are being mistreated, at least for a little while. Because when God walked among us as Jesus, Jesus gave people the benefit of the doubt. Jesus was mistreated by the proper authorities. And so perhaps, for a little while, we can make it our exercise to listen and know that God is around us, within us, and between us. The God who was, who is, and who is to come. The God who is known to us as Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, as Parent, as Son, as Spirit, is walking with us and walking with all those who are forgotten, overlooked, and mistreated. Thanks be to God. Amen.